You do have recipe cards in front of you with the recipes for tonight's class.
Oh, wait a minute, I don't think so.
Yes, you do. Don't just relax. All right, you've got it.
I'm in psychotherapy. I can.
Okay, you've got it under control. So you've got recipes, but I tell guests, pay more attention to what I'm saying and what I'm doing than trying to get every little thing written down on your piece of note paper. I think when you're paying too much attention to writing stuff down, you might lose kind of the essence of it. It's good to go back and refer to the recipe, but I think you garner more information by paying more attention to me. All right. All right, mussels. So my recipes have very few ingredients in them, and that points to presence or focus. I find the fewer ingredients I have, the more care and attention I can pay to those individual ingredients. I use my mother-in-law's Thanksgiving dinner. Actually, my brother-in-law does the cooking, but a dozen side dishes. Okay? Running around like a chicken with his head cut off. Now, I'm a professional chef. I don't know that I can pull together 12 side dishes that are all cooked just right and seasoned just right and served at the right temperature. I'd rather pare that list of 12 down to 3 and lavish my attention on those 3 items. All right? Less is more. Okay? All right, so one of the most difficult things I find with cooking a dish like this, any dishes that we're cooking in a saute pan really, where we require the addition of garlic, right? It's very particular when to add the garlic. You add the garlic too early and it gets brown and bitter. You add it too late and it is green and raw. So what do? This is what we do. We take a little bit of canola oil. Now, we use canola oil almost exclusively in the kitchen, and we use this for 2 reasons. Reason number 1, it has a very high burn temperature. We can get our pans really hot before canola oil starts to smoke or burn. Reason number 2 is neutrality of flavor. Canola oil doesn't taste like anything. And I know there's lots of shows out there where the first thing the chef does is grab extra virgin olive oil and pour it into a pan. Sacrilege in my mind. If you've ever had really good extra virgin Italian olive oil, you know it's really olivey. It's really designed as a condiment. It's designed to be drizzled over ripe tomatoes or fresh leafy greens or freshly grilled fish. And as I said, good olive oil is very olivey. And I always use the case of a sea scallop as an example. So I've got a beautiful fresh sea scallop and I want to sear it up. Sear it up in olive oil, and now it tastes like an olive-coated scallop. It no longer tastes like a scallop. So that's one of the main reasons we use canola oil. I know there are health benefits to cooking with olive oil, so what I tell guests, try using either pure or light olive oil. You've seen it. Obviously not as dark, so it's not as olivey. All right, and much less expensive than really good extra virgin olive oil. All right. So what we do is we start with a little bit of canola oil, and basically what we're going to do is we're going to take the guesswork out of the garlic. Starting in a cold pan, I'm just going to lightly brown this garlic in the pan, and then we're going to remove it. We're going to keep all that canola oil in there, and we'll use that nice garlic flavored oil to cook our mussels in. Butane fuel. These are great for camping, tailgating. If you own an electric stovetop, you can buy 4 of these and put them on top of your stovetop. Does anybody here have an electric stove? All right, my condolences. So in addition to our garlic, we're going to chop some scallions to go in. Now I like to cut my vegetables. In this case, in most cases, I like to cut them so that you can still tell that you're eating what it is. Oftentimes I find that a lot of dishes, vegetables are chopped too finely, so you don't really get a full feel of the flavor of the vegetable. So in this case, we're going to do 1/2 inch sections of scallion. We're going to do both the white and green. Button mushrooms, and these, you notice I prefer to quarter them. Once again, if I slice them, they're all going to kind of fall apart, and you kind of lose the nice texture of the mushroom and the full flavor of the mushroom. And then finally, some plum tomato. I prefer plum tomato because not a whole lot of water in it. It's got some body, so it's going to hold up in this sauce for us. Did you notice that, how the tomato stayed in place and I didn't squish all the juice out of it? Yes.
A little practice.
Well, no, that's a sharp knife. That's a sharp knife. That has nothing to do with practice. You could have done the same thing with this knife.
What is that knife?
This is, the brand is Global, which is Italian design and Japanese manufacture. And this is an 8-inch chef's knife. This is what I have in my hand probably 99.95% of the time.
Okay, so Global knives is what you're recommending?
I do not recommend Global knives. Global knives are what I use. I recommend, if you want a knife, go to a store where they have a chopping block and they have fruits and vegetables so you can use a knife. So a chef's knife is designed to be held between thumb and forefinger, all right? You'll notice I'm really not holding the handle. It's more just leverage against the palm of my hand. You may or may not be able to see a large callus on that hand, but right there, that is a chef's callus. That is from hanging over the back edge of a knife. And then finally, we've got some Prince Edward Island mussels. Fortunately, I traveled to Prince Edward Island this past summertime and got to see them being harvested. It was a sight to behold. It was really cool. Boat with a big pulley on it. They hook the rope onto it and drag the boat along, and every once in a while a big string of mussels come up. They come up, unhook it, throw it in the back of the boat. It was really cool. We were on shore and you could hear this big clunk of shells hitting the deck all the time. I tap it on the countertop, and if he closes up like this guy did, he's alive and ready to fry. But if you see something open, you tap it or knock it around, he's dead, and we discard him. We will generally take our mussels when we first get them in, put them in cold water, and let them soak for about half an hour or so. And that's not necessarily to rinse anything out of the interior. It's more just to get anything that might be on the shell off the shell. All right. When we store seafood, what we really want to do is we want to ice it, but we don't want it to sit in ice. So what we do is we have perforated pans. So we'll take our seafood, put it on the perforated pan, cover it with ice, and set that perforated pan in another pan. So any moisture from melting ice ends up in that bottom of the pan, not so the fish is swimming around in that, so to speak. All right? All right, so this recipe couldn't get any simpler from here on out. We have all our ingredients, all right? Is everybody with me? Okay.
Dump it in.
Dump it in. Sprinkle of salt and pepper. Cover with one of these custom-made pan covers. Just so you know, when you get a set of pot and pans, just throw all the tops out. We don't even have a top to a pot back there. We just use other pans or sheet pans or... So now, patience, all right? You'll notice I haven't done anything. This is the beauty of good cooking. I know you do. I know you do. You're probably the guy at the barbecue that will not leave those poor hamburgers alone, right? How many flips per hamburger? You got to flip them at least a dozen times? No. So I've left it alone. We're letting that heat rise in there, okay? So we'll give it a little. I'll give it a little swirl. We're not starting to open quite just yet, so maybe another 15 or 20 seconds covered, all right? All right. Notice we've got mussels starting to open here, all right? We'll give it one more shake. I like to shake it around so that those vegetables get down to the bottom. White wine. If we have the white wine that we're going to serve with dinner, that's the preferred wine we want to use. We also want to use good wine. When we're cooking with wine, we concentrate the flavors. So if we start with bad wine, we make it really, really bad. So we want to start with good wine. The wine, first thing it does is deglaze the pan. And we'll see more of that when we cook the filet. But those little brown bits that you see on the bottom of the pan, the introduction of liquid releases all that caramelized little bits of mussel and mushroom and scallion, whatever might be down on the bottom. So it releases that. And then we're going to reduce by about half. And it sounds like a fancy term, but it's exactly as it sounds. We've got a particular amount of volume of liquid in here, and we are going to reduce that volume of liquid. Okay, so we're reducing by half. Last thing we do, heat off. Couple little dabs of butter. Slow, gentle swirl. Okay, you notice I'm not making a bunch of noise and a bunch of racket. One thing I don't want to do is I don't want to knock all these mussels out of their shells. Okay, so we want to be gentle with them. But the other thing I want to do, and you can kind of see these butter pads slowly melting down. I want to remove from heat, and I want to keep it moving all the time so that that butter melts really slowly and makes kind of a creamy sauce for us. You can see what that sauce looks like when we melt it low and slow, as opposed to putting the butter in and keeping it on heat.
I have a question. So there's so many different kinds of butter.
Yes, unsalted we use all the time, just so we don't have to concern ourselves with salt content in it, so we can add our own salt and pepper to it. I personally probably like my foods overly salty, but I realize that I'm not cooking for myself and that there is salt and pepper on the table. So I try and give it the right amount of salt and prefer to err on the side of caution, not quite as much salt. Any other questions? All right. Michael's going to tell you about the wine you're drinking. I'm going to go help the chefs plate your mussels, and they should be out momentarily. All right.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. So beef Wellington, the problem I always found with beef Wellington, it's like the garlic in the scampi. No matter what I did, my puff pastry was never right. It never puffed. There was always like a gooey glob of dough on the underneath of the Wellington. Okay, I never got the proper rise out of the puff pastry that I wanted. So what did I do? This is what I did. I took puff pastry and I cooked it completely separate. So now you're going to have a nice, crispy, full of air puff pastry, because I think that's the key to Wellington, is that kind of the juxtaposition of the moist, tender filet and the crunchy puff pastry surrounding it. So puff pastry, buy it in the freezer section at the grocery store. Okay, I'm fortunate I get nice little 5-inch squares. You'll get the panels that fold out. Patience. You're not going to buy puff pastry in the afternoon and go home and make beef Wellington that night. Okay, or you will make a poor rendition of it, I should say. Puff pastry a day before, out of the freezer, into your refrigerator. let it thaw slowly and properly. Okay. When it comes to cutting puff pastry, I always find that knives tend to stick to it. You know, when you're trying to cut pastry, it picks up the knife. Perfect thing to cut puff pastry with, right? Okay. In this case, we did a triangle, but in any case, you can cut it down, and it's nice it doesn't stick to this. So 375 degrees. The key is keeping it super duper cold. There's lots of butter in here, and we want to keep the butter, if you've ever seen it made, they make a dough, they put a slab of butter into the middle of it, they fold it, roll it, fold it, roll it, fold it, roll it. So there's all these thin layers of butter in there, and that's what creates the rise, that steam from the butter melting. So we want to keep the butter super cold. So what I'll do is I'll bring it out, cut it, egg wash it, and then put it back in the refrigerator. All right, let it, depending on how long I've had it out, and then right into a 375 degree oven, close the door, set the timer for 8 minutes, and leave it alone. Okay, if you have a window and a light, please use it. If you are actually going into the oven, open the door and know what you're looking for. Okay? Have a purpose in mind when you open the door. Do not open the door and look around and poke around. All right? That heat is the key, especially with puff pastry. Like this afternoon I went and popped puff pastry into the oven, set a timer, came out here, was working on something. First thing I tell all my chefs, I've got puff pastry in the left oven, don't touch it. Okay? So you've got to open the door, you got to make a decision quick, and either pull it out or close the door as soon as you can. That heat escaping is horrible for it. Okay? And this little egg wash, meaning we scramble a little egg, pastry brush over the top so we get that nice little glossy brown finish. Okay? Duxelle, or mushroom onion reduction paste is the way I like to describe it. Pan, canola oil. Now once again, not starting with a hot pan, because once again, depending on how we cook things is the flavor that we're going to derive from them. So if we put onions in here, hot temperature, we're going to caramelize our onions and release a lot of their sugars. Now in this case with my Duxelle, I really kind of want you to know that you're eating an onion. I almost want there to be a little raw onion texture to it. So we've got our mushrooms. So we're going to dice our onion about the same size as our mushrooms, maybe a little bit smaller. So to dice an onion properly, we've taken the ends off our onion, peeled it, cut it in half, and we're going to use the structure of the onion to do a fair amount of the work for us. Okay? The key is not going all the way through the onion. We're going to try and keep this onion intact until we make our final cuts, all right? So we'll do a couple cuts in this direction. Then we'll do some cuts in this direction. You'll notice once again, staying away from the back of the onion, so I'm keeping that intact. Spin it around, whether you can see it or not. In between the cuts I made in this direction, I'm going to make cuts going back in the opposite direction. And then this is where a sharp knife is very important. Dull knife, we create lots of pressure, we squeeze everything out. All right. Sharp knife, everything stays intact. We might have a little area where there's a little cross section that didn't get cut up, but that looks good to me. Right in here, canola oil, salt and pepper. Now, this on, I would say probably medium-low is what I have it on. Probably 15 minutes. Okay, really low and slow. Once we've finished up, you're going to have lots of extra juice in the bottom of this. We're going to take the onions, the mushrooms, and the juice and put them into a food processor. Or you can just lay them out on a cutting board and chop it up if you'd like to. I like to run it through the food processor. The only thing I say again, save that beautiful mushroom juice that's going to come out. We're almost, as I was making it today, it almost looks like a mushroom and onion stew by the time I'm done with it. It's kind of swimming in mushroom juice, letting those cooking those onions down. All right. Hainew's got another one of these pans. Will you grab it for me?
Yeah.
All right, cool. So we make our duxelle. We've got our puff pastry. We have a tenderloin of beef. 2 tenderloins per animal, both on either side of their spines. That's why tenderloin is so tender. Because if you've ever seen cattle hanging out in the field, their backs really don't do a whole lot, except for collect sunlight. So they don't really do much, so there's not much muscular tissue. Thank you so much, Tom. And not a whole lot of fat in it. I like filet, fork tender, but filet doesn't necessarily have a whole lot of beef flavor. Beef flavor is derived from the melting of the fat, and in this case, tenderloin doesn't have a whole lot of fat, so it takes on kind of the flavors that we impart to it. All right. So I like to show people the tenderloin because this is one thing where you can save a lot of money if you try doing this, practice doing it. It's probably the easiest cut of meat to butcher. Something like this, you can go to your local supermarket for tenderloin or filet mignon, depending on the season, $19 to $25 a pound maybe, where you can go to BJ's or Costco and you can buy a tenderloin just like this for about half the price per pound. And even with trimming and waste, you're going to be ahead of the game. So we start just kind of digging in right at this little joint right here. We'll get this first layer of skin off. Now, tenderloin will normally have what we call the chain or side muscle. You notice, see how that's separating out right there? Okay. So as I said, a lot of that we can do by do with our hands. So you'll notice I'm creating a little bit of tension or a little bit of pressure here. So just use the tip of the knife to separate this chain.
So did you grab that in the right where the little wing kind of hangs on?
Yeah, right between kind of where this side muscle attached. I just kind of use my fingers to spread that apart to get my knife in there. And there's normally a little wedge of beef right here that we can butcher out. So this stuff, we will trim this up, and what we do is we save anything we can for stock, but we'll take this, butcher out as much of the usable meat as we can, and then what we'll do over the course of the week while we're butchering tenderloins, we'll chop this up and roast it and set it aside, and then Sunday morning when I come in, I'll start tenderloin hash with all those roasted bits of tenderloin. I basically take all those roasted bits of tenderloin, cover them with beef stock, put them on the stove low and slow for about 3 hours, take a potato masher to it, falls apart, and that's tenderloin hash. So once again, back to business. So I pay $11 a pound for this. I'm paying $11 a pound for this too. This is the same amount of money, so we have to use as much of it as we can. So I'm trying to kind of get everything that doesn't look like red meat removed. Flip it over, and you can actually kind of see, do you see these little marks right here, strips right here? This is where this tenderloin was attached to the top of the rib cage. All right, so that's where those marks come from. And on the back side, we normally have a little bit of silver skin. We'll get that removed. On the back side, I'm not trying to get all the fat removed. I'm just trying to get some of these little knobs of fat, and I almost just run the knife along, and if it grabs something, I'll take it off. If it doesn't, We'll leave it on. So end piece or the tail piece, that turns into hash. If you've ever heard the term tornadoes, this cut of the tenderloin. If you notice, the meat is not as dense, okay? Cooks the same, eats the same, just kind of a little different texture. So then we're into center cut filet mignon, all right? Gonna take a little 4-ounce piece, set it aside. Now, meat cookery. When we go to cook this, we want a nice hot pan, salt only. And the reason we use salt only is because pepper tends to burn when we're cooking things at high heat. So salt only. So as I said, pepper tends to burn and get a little bit bitter. A little bit of canola oil. Whenever we're working into a saute pan, we work away from ourselves. So if I'm putting this in and I get splashed, I drop the filet, it splashes towards you guys as opposed to up towards me. All right? So a piece of steak this big is probably going to take about 4 minutes on either side to get medium rare. Just because we removed it from the oven or the stovetop or the grill, it does not mean the heat that's been transmitted to it is still driving towards center. So we want something to finish at something of this size to finish at 135 degrees. We pull it probably at 130 degrees. Let it set someplace warm, not someplace hot, but just on the stove top or something. Let it rest for about 3 to 4 minutes, and in that 3 to 4 minutes, that last 5 degrees of temperature we're looking for will be achieved. So crepe Suzettes. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to make some crepe batter. So I've been cooking brunch since I was 17 years old. I work the poaching station. I know my way around an egg. All right, I'm going to try and teach you how to crack an egg with one hand. All right? Okay, it's all right. I'll try and do it slowly for you. This is one of the items that measures in the hundreds of thousands. I'm reaching close to 500,000 eggs cracked in my lifetime. I'm not sure whether to be proud of that or concerned about that. Okay, so we'll try and do it in slow motion. I love the sound effects. I need you at brunch on Sundays, right? Boo, 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 boo. It might grow tiresome, don't you think?
Did it take long for you to learn that?
Only like 2 or 3 brunch shifts. You learn really quick. So we've got our eggs. I like to break up our eggs a little bit. So if we've ever got a bowl that wants to run around on us, make a little towel, lay a little snake like gonna snap your little brother or sister at the beach. Put it around the bowl, and then you notice just tighten it a little bit. All right, so it keeps it nice and steady for us. So I like to get all my wet ingredients first. Egg, 1/2 cup milk, 1/2 cup water. Oh, this was 2 tablespoons melted butter. It will be 2 tablespoons melted butter in a moment. And I just melted slow. If you notice, I kind of brought it out and popped it into the pan on this after it kind of cooled down a little bit. I don't necessarily want to bring it to a boil or anything like that. I really just want to just basically melt it down. Once again, unsalted butter.
I don't know if you covered this already. What kind of pans do you use?
These, one reason I bring these pans out, these are molded aluminum pans. These are restaurant supply, general issue. These are probably $18 a pan. So one of the reasons I bring these out is to show people that you don't need to spend a lot of money to cook well. Really what you need to do is pay attention. So we've got all our dry ingredients, all our wet ingredients. Now we're going to add our dry. all-purpose flour, and salt. Now what we like to do, we like to get this all incorporated, and then we like to cover it with a kitchen rag and let it sit on the counter for about half an hour, 45 minutes. So I'll get it all incorporated. You see those clumps? We let it sit for about half an hour, 45 minutes. We go back to it. We give it a quick whip, and all that flour breaks down for us. And we've got a nice, smooth batter. All right, so we have to let it rest for a little bit. So now when it comes to making crepes, normally our first crepe is sacrificial, meaning we're kind of trying to fine-tune our pan temperature, all right? And I don't really want a whole lot of oil in there, but I just want a nice little skim of oil over everything. The next key, the proper size ladle. Okay, I have a number of these in the kitchen, 2 ounce, 4 ounce, 6 ounce, 8 ounce. Okay, and that way we know every time we're pouring something into this pan, we're pouring the exact same amount of crepe batter. It doesn't have to be a ladle. If you've got, little ramekins at home that are, whatever you can use that's the same size, so you're using the same, all right? So as I said, the first one is generally sacrificial. This seems a little low to me, low heat. But you notice, put my batter in, roll it around, let it bake. All right, so as I said, sacrificial crepe. I normally have a little bit of butter and some raspberry jelly sitting around just in case one goes bad. So while those are cooking, we're going to, does anybody know what the term is when you take the segments out of an orange, the official term? Okay, you learned something new. What's that? Supreme. So you supreme citrus fruit. So if you're ever segmenting lemons, limes, oranges, to supreme an orange. All right? So that's what we're doing right now. I like to follow the cut in front of me. If you'll notice, I'm running the edge of the knife around along that line. Work our way all the way around, and generally we'll have to flip this orange over to get to the bottom of it. We want to get all this pith off. See what a sharp knife will do? Okay, so now. So much like the invention of lobster bisque, you have this, and then you have all this, right? Paid the same per pound. So what I like to do, I make my own kind of pseudo orange marmalade. I take all these, skin a little bit of the pith off them, slice them really thin. I will blanch them 3 times is generally what I do. So put them in water, bring it to a boil, strain them. Fresh water, bring them to a boil, strain them. Fresh water, bring them to a boil, strain them. Okay? I didn't say this was easy. I said this is how you want to do it. The reason we do that is because we want to work all that, the bitterness out of the pitter, out of the peel. So our crepes coming around. So we can do, let gravity be your friend. Okay, the pan's not attached to the stove. You notice how I just got it down to 45 degrees. And then it's a simple little flip. All right. Supreme in our orange. One side, you can see where the segment is. The other side. And then I'll just pivot the knife out. Sometimes it'll catch down there on the bottom, and this little move right here separates it. Seedless navel oranges, obviously. And everybody remember, we're in the middle of citrus season right now. We're getting close to the end of citrus season. Winter is the time for citrus. I remember when I was a kid getting a box of oranges from my grandparents in Sarasota, And that was kind of the only time you saw fresh oranges, really. So we'll take our crepette, fold it into quarters, set it aside. This was one of my first jobs in the kitchen, making crepes, but we used to use 8 pans at a time. But you get into a rhythm. You know, you get them all the right temperature, and then it's easy. Batter. One comes out, batter into the next. Keeps rolling. So we're going to segment all this, and then when we're finished segmenting, even with this little, let's make sure, get all the juice out of there. All right? Get all that juice out of there. So sometimes you'll come across a crepe that's sticking to the bottom of the pan. A lot of times if you just take the pan, I don't like banging it on these little burners, but just pop it on a countertop or something like that to loosen it. So we're gonna let this crepe finish over here. I'm gonna start putting together our sauce. Orange juice. Sugar. And we're going to let this reduce by about half. Okay, so once again, as we spoke before, reducing, we're just taking the volume of liquid in the pan and we're reducing it. We're going to bring it up to a higher temperature right now. So we do those little quarter folds, so those are ready to go back into our sauce when we've got it ready. Questions so far? So what we're going to do, the key is to this fresh orange juice and fresh oranges, I don't put into the sauce at the very last minute. There's no reason to cook these oranges at all, right? They're nice, fresh, ripe oranges. They don't need anything. All they really need to do is heat through, okay? So we reduced by about half. We've got a little bit of Grand Marnier. Now normally with something like this, when we're adding Grand Marnier to this, we're not going to get any flame because we've got liquid in there already, but I always err on the side of caution, remove from heat, add it away from heat. Sometimes you'll get it if it's floating on the top, but oftentimes not. Oh, there we got a little bit of flame. And basically what we're doing there is we're cooking off the alcohol content, but we're leaving behind the essence of the liqueur. And we can do that through evaporation too, not to the same extent that we get with flaming. And then finally, our homemade orange marmalade. You don't have to make your own marmalade. There's plenty of good orange marmalades out there that you can buy at the store. All right. So at this point, lay our crepes back into the sauce. Throw one off the end of the cooking demonstration table. And as I said, the last minute, those fresh oranges back in there. Crepes in the bottom of the plate. And that beautiful orange sauce over the top. And in your case, a little bit of vanilla ice cream, a little touch of whipped cream. All right?
It's delicious.
Everybody enjoying?
Fabulous. Fabulous.
Glad to hear it. Thank you. My pleasure. Enjoy.